A dedicated nurse lost everything when her husband's gambling addiction destroyed her career. What she discovered about herself in the aftermath left everyone at Riverside General Hospital speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell had always believed that hard work and integrity were enough to protect the life she'd built. For 12 years, she'd walked through the sliding doors of Riverside General Hospital with her head held high, knowing that patients trusted her with their most vulnerable moments. The pediatric ward had become her second home, and the children there knew her gentle voice could ease any fear. She was the nurse who stayed late to read bedtime stories, who remembered every child's favorite color, and who had never missed a shift in over a decade. Her colleagues respected her dedication, and parents requested her specifically when their children needed extended care. Sarah had worked her way up from a new graduate struggling with IV insertions to the senior pediatric nurse who trained incoming staff. She took pride in her spotless record, her patient satisfaction scores, and the way doctors sought her input during difficult cases. At 34, she felt she had finally found her place in the world. The morning everything changed started. Like any other Tuesday in Cedar Falls, Ohio, Sarah prepared breakfast in their modest kitchen while Tom, her husband of 8 years, rushed around looking for his work keys. He kissed her goodbye with the same distracted peck he'd given her for months, his mind already elsewhere. She noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he grabbed his coffee, but attributed it to the early hour. Tom had been working longer hours at the insurance company lately, coming home stressed and distant, but Sarah assumed it was just job pressure. She drove to work through the familiar tree-lined streets, mentally preparing for another day of caring for sick children. The autumn leaves painted Cedar Falls in warm oranges and reds, and Sarah felt grateful for the predictable rhythm of her life. She had no idea that within hours, that life would be completely shattered. The phone call came during her lunch break. Sarah was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, reviewing patient charts between bites of a sandwich, when her personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a local area code. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Detective Robert Hayes with the Cedar Falls Police Department. We need you to come to the station immediately regarding your husband, Tom Mitchell." Sarah's sandwich fell from her hands. "Is he hurt? Was there an accident?" "No, ma'am, but we need to discuss some serious financial irregularities involving your joint accounts and some activities your husband has been involved in. Can you come in within the hour?" The detective's tone was professional but grave, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. She looked around the busy cafeteria, watching her colleagues laugh over their meals, completely unaware that her world was crumbling. With shaking hands, she called her supervisor to request emergency personal time and drove to the police station in a daze. What she learned in that sterile interrogation room destroyed everything she thought she knew about her marriage. Tom had been gambling for over 2 years, starting with small bets on football games and escalating to high-stakes poker rooms in the city. He'd maxed out their credit cards, taken a second mortgage on their house without her knowledge, and finally, in desperation, had begun embezzling money from his insurance clients' premium payments. "Your husband stole over $60,000 from elderly clients who trusted him with their life insurance payments," Detective Hayes explained. "Some of these people have had their policies cancelled because the premiums were never actually paid. When they tried to file claims for medical expenses, they discovered their coverage had lapsed." Sarah sat in stunned silence as the detective laid out bank statements, credit card bills, and forged documents. Tom had been intercepting their mail for months, hiding the mounting debt from her. The signature on the second mortgage looked like hers, but she'd never seen the paperwork. Every financial foundation of their life together had been built on lies. "We're arresting him this afternoon," the detective continued. Given the amount stolen and the number of victims, he's looking at serious felony charges. The case will likely make the local news. Sarah drove home in a fog, trying to process how the man she'd shared a bed with for 8 years could have deceived her so completely. Their house, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt foreign and threatening. She found herself looking at every piece of furniture, wondering what was real and what had been purchased with stolen money. Tom arrived home that evening, in handcuffs, flanked by 2 police officers. As they led him away, he finally looked at Sarah with something approaching remorse in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could win it back." Sarah watched her husband disappear into the police car, neighbors gathering on their front porches to witness the spectacle. She knew that by morning, everyone in Cedar Falls would know about Tom's crimes. In a small town, secrets didn't stay hidden long. The news broke 3 days later. The local paper ran the story on the front page. Local insurance agent arrested for embezzling client funds to fund gambling addiction. Tom's photo was prominently displayed, but the article also mentioned his wife, Sarah Mitchell, a nurse at Riverside General Hospital. The reporter noted that authorities were investigating whether she had any knowledge of the financial crimes. Sarah read the article in her car before her shift, her hands trembling as she saw her name in print connected to words like investigation and embezzlement. She knew the moment she walked into the hospital, everything would change. The whispers started immediately. Colleagues who had greeted her warmly for years now looked away when she passed in the hallways. She could feel their eyes on her during report changes, could sense the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered a room. The children's parents, who had once trusted her completely, now seemed nervous when she approached their child's bedside. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the head of pediatrics who had mentored Sarah for years, called her into the office on Friday afternoon. Elena's usually warm demeanor was strained as she gestured for Sarah to sit down. "Sarah, I need to ask you directly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Did you have any knowledge of your husband's activities?" "None," Sarah replied firmly. "I was as shocked as anyone. I've been married to a stranger, apparently." Eleanor nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "I believe you, but the hospital administration is concerned about the publicity. James Parker wants to see you Monday morning." Sarah spent the weekend in her empty house, Tom having been denied bail due to flight risk concerns. She paced the rooms where they'd planned their future together, trying to understand how she'd missed the signs. The gambling addiction explained so much. Tom's mood swings, his secretiveness about their finances, the way he'd begun working late and taking mysterious phone calls. On Monday morning, Sarah sat across from James Parker, the hospital administrator, in his corner office overlooking the parking lot where she'd parked for 12 years. Parker was a thin man in his 50s who'd always been cordial but distant with the nursing staff. "Sarah, I'm sure you understand the difficult position this puts the hospital in," Parker began. "Your husband's crimes have created a public relations nightmare. Patients are calling to ask if their nurse might be involved in financial crimes. The board is very concerned." "Mr. Parker, I've been cleared by the police investigation. I had no knowledge of what Tom was doing." "I understand that, but perception is reality in healthcare. Trust is everything. The board feels that your continued employment here could damage the hospital's reputation." Parker slid a document across the desk. "We're prepared to offer you a severance package if you resign voluntarily. It would be better for everyone than a prolonged investigation or termination proceedings." Sarah stared at the resignation letter, pre-typed with her name at the bottom. 12 years of dedicated service, thousands of children she'd helped heal, countless nights she'd stayed late to comfort scared families. All of it reduced to a liability that needed to be managed. If I don't sign this, then we'll have to consider other options. The board is meeting this afternoon to discuss your employment status. Sarah knew she was being forced out, but she also knew that fighting would only prolong the nightmare. With a heavy heart, she signed the resignation letter and cleaned out her locker for the last time. Her colleagues watched in uncomfortable silence as she packed 12 years of memories into cardboard boxes. Lisa Thompson, her closest friend among the nurses, helped her carry the boxes to her car. "This is wrong, Sarah. Everyone knows you're not responsible for what Tom did." "It doesn't matter," Sarah replied, tears finally starting to fall. "I'm toxic now. The hospital has to protect itself." As she drove away from Riverside General for the last time, Sarah felt more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. Her marriage was over, her career was destroyed, and her reputation in Cedar Falls was ruined. At 34, she had to start completely over with no idea how to begin. The financial reality hit her within days. With Tom in jail and her income gone, Sarah couldn't afford the mortgage payments on their house. The second mortgage Tom had secretly taken meant she owed more than the house was worth. She was forced to list it for a short sale, knowing she'd lose the only home she'd ever owned. The local nursing community was small and interconnected. Word spread quickly about her resignation from Riverside General and other hospitals in the area were reluctant to hire someone connected to a financial scandal, regardless of the circumstances. Sarah found herself blacklisted from the career she'd devoted her life to building. Desperate for income, she took a job as a certified nursing assistant at Sunny Meadows Nursing Home on the outskirts of town. It was a significant step down from her previous position. Lower pay, less responsibility, and little of the job satisfaction she'd found in pediatric nursing. The elderly residents were kind, but Sarah felt like she was invisible, just another face among the overworked staff. Mrs. Dorothy Chen became Sarah's favorite resident during those difficult months. At 87, Dorothy was sharp, funny, and one of the few people who didn't know about Sarah's scandal. Dorothy had been a teacher for 40 years and had a gift for reading people. She sensed Sarah's sadness and made it her mission to lift her spirits during their daily conversations. "You have the heart of a healer," Dorothy told Sarah one afternoon, as Sarah helped her with physical therapy exercises. "I can see it in how you touch people, how you listen. Whatever brought you here, it wasn't meant to keep you down?" Sarah found herself sharing pieces of her story with Dorothy, carefully omitting the details that might change how the elderly woman saw her. Dorothy listened without judgment, offering the kind of wisdom that comes from decades of watching life's ups and downs. "Sometimes we have to lose everything to find out who we really are," Dorothy said one day. "The most beautiful flowers grow from the richest soil, and that soil is often made from things that have died and been transformed into something new." The divorce proceedings were finalized 6 months after Tom's arrest. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to his victims. Sarah signed the papers in a lawyer's office, officially ending the chapter of her life that had defined her for 8 years. She felt relief, mixed with profound sadness, for the future they'd planned together, now reduced to legal documents and property settlements. Living in a small rental apartment across town, Sarah gradually began to rebuild her sense of self. She volunteered at the local food bank on weekends, finding purpose in helping families who were struggling. The work reminded her why she'd become a nurse in the first place, the deep satisfaction of caring for others during their most vulnerable moments. At Sunny Meadows, Sarah began to notice things that troubled her. The facility was understaffed, and the residents weren't receiving the level of care they deserved. Medications were sometimes delayed, Physical therapy sessions were rushed, and the emotional needs of the elderly residents were often ignored. In the rush to complete tasks, Sarah started staying after her shifts to spend extra time with residents who seemed lonely or confused. She organized small activities, helped residents write letters to distant family members, and advocated for better care when she noticed problems. Her supervisors appreciated her initiative, but didn't have the resources to implement the improvements Sarah suggested. One evening in late spring, Sarah was finishing her rounds at Sunny Meadows when she heard commotion from the main hallway. Mrs. Dorothy Chen had fallen in the recreation room, and the on-duty nurse was nowhere to be found. Sarah rushed to Dorothy's side, finding the elderly woman conscious but clearly in pain, her left wrist bent at an unnatural angle. "Don't move, Dorothy," Sarah said gently, kneeling beside her friend. "Let me check you over first." The facilities. Protocol required calling an ambulance for any fall, but Sarah could see that Dorothy was stable and alert. Her years of pediatric training kicked in as she carefully assessed Dorothy for head injuries, checked her pupils, and gently palpated her neck and spine. The wrist was definitely fractured, but there were no signs of more serious trauma. "Sarah, dear, I feel so foolish," Dorothy whispered. "I was reaching for my book and lost my balance." "Accidents happen," Sarah replied, carefully immobilizing Dorothy's wrist with supplies from the nursing station. "The important thing is that you're going to be fine." When the paramedics arrived, they were impressed by Sarah's assessment and stabilization of the injury. One of them, a young EMT named Marcus, looked at her with curiosity. "You're not the usual CNA here," he observed. "You handled that like someone with serious medical training." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I used to be a registered nurse." "Used to be?" Marcus asked as they loaded Dorothy onto the stretcher. Sarah didn't answer, but she accompanied Dorothy to the emergency room at Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital, a smaller facility on the other side of town from Riverside General. She held Dorothy's uninjured hand during the ambulance ride, grateful to feel useful in a medical emergency again. At the hospital, Sarah stayed with Dorothy through the X-rays and treatment. The emergency room was busy, understaffed, and clearly struggling to manage the patient load. Sarah watched nurses rushing between rooms, doctors looking frazzled, and patients waiting longer than they should for basic care. Dr. Amanda Foster, the attending physician treating Dorothy, noticed Sarah's attentiveness and medical knowledge. When Sarah suggested positioning Dorothy differently for comfort while they waited for the orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Foster raised an eyebrow. "Are you family?" Dr. Foster asked. "I work at her nursing home," Sarah replied. "I'm a certified nursing assistant." "With nursing training?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I was an RN for 12 years in pediatrics." Dr. Foster studied Sarah's face, clearly trying to place her. "At which hospital?" "Riverside General," Sarah said quietly, bracing herself for recognition. Dr. Foster's expression changed as the pieces clicked together. "You're Sarah Mitchell. I heard about what happened with your husband." Sarah's stomach dropped, expecting the familiar look of judgment or suspicion. Instead, Dr. Foster's face showed something unexpected: sympathy. "That was a terrible situation," Dr. Foster continued. "I can't imagine how difficult it must have been to lose your position because of something you had no control over." The kindness in Dr. Foster's voice nearly brought tears to Sarah's eyes. It had been months since anyone in the medical community had spoken to her with such understanding. Dorothy's surgery went well, and she was admitted overnight for observation. Sarah stayed until visiting hours ended, making sure Dorothy was comfortable and understood her discharge instructions. As she prepared to leave, Dr. Foster approached her again. "Sarah, I don't know your current situation, but we're desperately short-staffed here. If you're interested in returning to nursing, I'd be happy to speak with our nursing director. Sarah stared at Dr. Foster in disbelief. You'd recommend me, even knowing about the scandal? I've been watching you tonight. You have excellent clinical skills, genuine compassion, and the kind of experience we need. What your husband did doesn't define your abilities as a nurse. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a spark of hope. I'd be very interested in discussing it. Dr. Foster handed her a business card. Call tomorrow and ask for Janet Mills, our nursing director. I'll speak with her first thing in the morning. Sarah drove home that night, feeling something she'd almost forgotten. Excitement about the possibility of returning to real nursing. Cedar Falls Memorial was smaller than Riverside General, but it was still acute care medicine. It was a chance to use her skills again, to feel like herself again. The next morning, Sarah called Janet Mills and arranged for an interview. She spent the day researching Cedar Falls Memorial, updating her resume, and preparing to explain the gap in her employment. She practiced her answers to difficult questions, determined to present herself professionally despite the circumstances that had led her away from nursing. Janet Mills was a practical woman in her 50s who had been nursing for over 30 years. She met with Sarah in her small office overlooking the hospital's parking lot, a much less intimidating setting than James Parker's corporate office at Riverside General. Dr. Foster spoke very highly of your skills, Janet began. She said you handled a difficult situation with expertise and compassion. Thank you, Sarah replied. I've missed nursing more than I can express. Janet leaned back in her chair. I'm going to be direct with you, Sarah. I know about your situation with your husband and what happened at Riverside General. In a community this size, news travels fast. Sarah's heart sank, preparing for another rejection. However, Janet continued, I also know that you were never implicated in any wrongdoing. I've spoken with several people who worked with you at Riverside, and every single one described you as one of the most dedicated nurses they'd ever known. Sarah felt tears threatening. It means more than you know to hear that. We need experienced nurses desperately. Our emergency department is struggling, and we're about to lose 2 more nurses to burnout. I can offer you a position as a staff nurse in the ED, but I need to be honest about the challenges. We're understaffed. The pay is less than you made at Riverside, and you'll be starting over in terms of seniority. I don't care about the seniority, Sarah said quickly. I just want the chance to be a nurse again. Janet smiled for the first time during the interview. Can you start Monday? Sarah felt like crying with relief. Yes, absolutely. Good. Dr. Foster specifically requested that you be oriented to work with her team. She believes you'll be a strong addition to our emergency department. Walking out of Cedar Falls Memorial that day, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. She had a purpose again, a reason to wake up in the morning beyond just surviving. The drive back to Sunny Meadows to give her notice felt like a victory lap. Dorothy was thrilled when Sarah told her about the job offer. I knew something good was coming for you, the elderly woman said, reaching out to squeeze Sarah's hand with her uninjured arm. You were meant for more than this place, dear. You have a gift for healing. Sarah's last week at Sunny Meadows was bittersweet. She'd grown genuinely fond of many of the residents, and they were sad to see her go. But she also felt guilty about leaving them in an understaffed facility where they wouldn't receive the attention they deserved. On her final day, the residents surprised her with a small party. They'd pooled their money to buy her a new stethoscope, and Dorothy had organized the whole thing despite her broken wrist. Sarah was deeply moved by their gesture and promised to visit when she could. You gave us hope, Dorothy said as they said goodbye. Sometimes when people are forgotten by the world, they forget their own worth. You reminded us that we still matter. Sarah's first day at Cedar Falls Memorial was a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The emergency department was fast-paced and challenging, exactly what she'd missed about hospital nursing. Her pediatric experience translated well to emergency medicine, and she found herself comfortable with the variety of cases and the need for quick assessment and intervention. Dr. Foster took Sarah under her wing, involving her in complex cases and trusting her clinical judgment. The other nurses were initially cautious around Sarah, clearly aware of her background, but her competence and work ethic quickly won them over. "She knows her stuff," Sarah overheard one nurse tell another, after they'd worked together on a cardiac arrest. Whatever happened with her husband, it doesn't affect her nursing skills. After her first month at Cedar Falls Memorial, Sarah felt like herself again. She was making a difference in people's lives, using skills she'd spent years developing, and working alongside colleagues who respected her abilities. The pay was indeed less than she'd made at Riverside General, but it was enough to live on, and the job satisfaction was immeasurable. One evening during her second month, Sarah was caring for an elderly man who'd been brought in after a heart attack. As she monitored his condition and provided comfort to his frightened wife, she realized how much she'd grown from her experiences over the past year. The devastation of Tom's betrayal and the loss of her career had forced her to examine what truly mattered to her. She discovered reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, and she'd learned to find value in herself that wasn't dependent on other people's approval or recognition. "You have such gentle hands," the patient's wife said to Sarah as she adjusted his IV. "He's been so scared, but you make him feel safe." Sarah smiled, remembering similar comments from parents in the pediatric ward. The core of who she was as a nurse hadn't changed, even though everything else in her life had been transformed. Dr. Foster began including Sarah in staff meetings and asking for her input on department policies. Her experience with process improvement from her time at Riverside General proved valuable in identifying ways to streamline patient care and reduce wait times. "You think differently than the rest of us," Dr. Foster told her one day. "Your perspective on patient flow and triage has been incredibly helpful." Sarah was grateful for the recognition, but more importantly, she was grateful for the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to patient care again. She'd forgotten how satisfying it was to solve problems and implement solutions that directly improved outcomes. One afternoon, Sarah was treating a young mother who'd brought her toddler to the emergency room with a high fever. The child was cranky and scared, and the mother was exhausted and worried. Sarah's pediatric experience immediately kicked in as she knelt down to the child's level and began speaking in the soft, reassuring voice she'd perfected over 12 years of caring for sick children. "Hi there, sweetie," Sarah said gently. "I know you don't feel very good, but we're going to help you feel better, okay?" The child stopped crying and looked at Sarah with wide, trusting eyes. Sarah continued talking to him while she took his vital signs, explaining each step in simple terms and making the examination feel like a game. Within minutes, she had the child laughing despite his fever. "You're amazing with him," the mother said, relief evident in her voice. "He never cooperates for doctors or nurses, but he likes you." "I used to work in pediatrics," Sarah explained as she prepared the child's medication. "Children just need to know they're safe and that someone understands they're scared." Dr. Foster observed the interaction from across the department and made a mental note. Sarah's pediatric skills were being wasted in general emergency medicine. There might be an opportunity to use her expertise more strategically. That evening, Dr. Foster asked Sarah to stay after her shift for a brief conversation. They sat in the break room with cups of coffee, discussing the busy day they'd just completed. "Sarah, I've been thinking about your background in pediatrics," Dr. Foster began. "We don't have a dedicated pediatric emergency program here, but we see enough children to justify developing one." Sarah's interest was immediately piqued. What kind of program? Specialized pediatric emergency protocols, staff training? For child-specific care, maybe even a designated pediatric area within the ED, I think you could help us develop something that would significantly improve our care for young patients. The possibility of combining her emergency medicine experience with her pediatric expertise was exciting. Sarah had enjoyed the variety of emergency nursing, but she'd missed the specialized focus on children's unique needs. I'd love to be involved in developing something like that, Sarah said enthusiastically. Good. I'm going to propose it to administration next week. If they approve the project, would you be interested in leading the development team? Sarah couldn't hide her excitement. Absolutely. As she drove home that night, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few months. She'd gone from feeling completely hopeless and worthless to having opportunities she'd never imagined. The experience of losing everything had taught her to appreciate what truly mattered and to recognize her own resilience. Her small apartment no longer felt like a punishment or a reminder of her losses. It felt like a fresh start, a place where she could build something new and authentic. She'd learned to cook for one, to enjoy quiet evenings with a book, and to find contentment in simple pleasures. The divorce from Tom was final, and while the betrayal still hurt, Sarah was beginning to understand that his addiction and deception were about his own weaknesses, not about any failure on her part. She'd been a good wife and a loyal partner. His choices were his responsibility, not hers. Most importantly, Sarah was rediscovering her professional identity and her sense of purpose. The work at Cedar Falls Memorial was challenging and meaningful, and her colleagues had come to respect and value her contributions. She was no longer defined by the scandal that had driven her from Riverside General. She was rebuilding her reputation. Based on her own merits and achievements, Dr. Foster's proposal for a pediatric emergency program represented more than just a professional opportunity. It was validation that Sarah's experience and expertise were valuable, that she had something unique to offer that could benefit the entire community's children. The possibility of pioneering a new program and making a lasting impact on pediatric emergency care filled her with a sense of purpose she'd thought she'd lost forever. The pediatric emergency program proposal was approved by the hospital administration 3 weeks later, and Sarah found herself leading a team of 5 nurses in developing protocols that would transform how Cedar Falls Memorial treated young patients. The project energized her in ways she hadn't felt since her early days at Riverside General, when everything about nursing had felt new and full of possibility. Sarah spent her days off researching best practices from children's hospitals across the country, studying pediatric emergency medicine standards and designing treatment protocols specifically adapted for a smaller community hospital. She reached out to former colleagues from her pediatric days, swallowing her pride to ask for advice and insights that might benefit the program. Dr. Rebecca Harrison, who had been Sarah's mentor during her early years at Riverside General, responded to Sarah's email with surprising warmth. They arranged to meet for coffee at a neutral location halfway between Cedar Falls and the city where Riverside General was located. "Sarah, I was heartbroken when I heard what happened to you," Dr. Harrison said as they sat in a quiet corner booth of the diner. "Losing you was one of the stupidest decisions that hospital ever made." The validation from someone Sarah had always respected professionally meant more than she could express. "It was a difficult time," Sarah replied carefully. "But I'm learning that sometimes losing everything can lead to finding something better." Dr. Harrison leaned forward with interest. "Tell me about this pediatric emergency program you're developing." As Sarah described her vision for comprehensive pediatric emergency care at Cedar Falls Memorial, Dr. Harrison's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. She began offering suggestions, sharing resources, and connecting Sarah with specialists who could provide consultation on the most complex aspects of the program. What you're proposing is actually more innovative than what we're doing at Riverside, Dr. Harrison admitted. You're integrating family-centered care principles with emergency medicine in ways that could revolutionize how smaller hospitals approach pediatric emergencies. The conversation lasted 3 hours, and by the end, Dr. Harrison had offered to serve as an unofficial consultant on the project. She also mentioned something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. There's been talk at Riverside about developing a similar program, Dr. Harrison said. The board is finally realizing that our pediatric emergency care isn't meeting community standards. They're looking for someone with the expertise to lead a major overhaul. Sarah tried to keep her expression neutral, but the irony wasn't lost on her. The hospital that had forced her out was now recognizing the need for exactly the kind of program she was pioneering elsewhere. Back at Cedar Falls Memorial, Sarah threw herself into the pediatric program development with renewed energy. She organized training sessions for the nursing staff, collaborated with local pediatricians to establish referral protocols, and worked with the hospital's child life specialist to create a more welcoming environment for young patients and their families. The first phase of the program launched 6 weeks later with a redesigned pediatric treatment area featuring colorful murals, child-sized furniture, and specialized equipment appropriate for patients from infancy through adolescence. Sarah had fought for every detail, from the height of the examination tables to the types of medical supplies stocked in each room. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Patient satisfaction scores for pediatric visits increased by 40% in the first month. Parents reported feeling more confident in the care their children received, and the nursing staff expressed greater comfort and competence when treating young patients. Local pediatricians began referring more complex cases to Cedar Falls Memorial, instead of sending them to larger hospitals in the city. The emergency department saw a 25% increase in pediatric visits, but more importantly, the quality of care improved significantly. Dr. Foster was thrilled with the results and made sure Sarah received full credit for the program's success. At the quarterly hospital board meeting, she presented detailed statistics showing the program's impact on patient outcomes, satisfaction scores, and the hospital's reputation in the community. Sarah Mitchell has single-handedly transformed our pediatric emergency capabilities, Dr. Foster told the board. Her expertise and dedication have created a program that's being recognized regionally as a model for other community hospitals. Board members who had been skeptical about investing in specialized pediatric services were now asking about expanding the program further. Sarah was invited to present her vision for Phase 2 of the initiative, which included additional staff, training, enhanced equipment, and partnerships with regional children's specialists. As Sarah stood before the board presenting her comprehensive plan, she felt a confidence and professional satisfaction she hadn't experienced since before Tom's arrest. She was no longer the disgraced nurse trying to rebuild her career. She was a recognized expert leading innovative change in pediatric emergency medicine. The board approved funding for Phase 2 unanimously, along with a significant raise for Sarah and a new title, Pediatric Emergency Program Coordinator. The promotion came with increased responsibilities, a leadership role in the emergency department, and recognition as one of the hospital's key clinical innovators. Word of Sarah's success began spreading beyond Cedar Falls Memorial. She was invited to speak at a regional nursing conference about developing pediatric emergency programs in community hospitals. The presentation was well received, and several hospital administrators approached her afterward seeking consultation on implementing similar programs at their facilities. Dr. Harrison attended the conference and was visibly proud as she watched. Sarah fielded questions from an audience of seasoned healthcare professionals. After the presentation, she pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "I need to tell you something," Dr. Harrison said. "The board at Riverside General has been asking about you." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What kind of asking?" "They're finally admitting they made a mistake letting you go. Your program at Cedar Falls is getting attention throughout the region, and they're hearing from pediatricians who are impressed with what you've accomplished." The idea of Riverside General acknowledging their error was surreal. Sarah had spent months feeling like a pariah in the medical community, and now her former employer was apparently reconsidering their decision. "What exactly are they saying?" Sarah asked. "James Parker has been quietly asking colleagues about your current work. I think he's realizing that losing an experienced pediatric nurse over a situation you had no control over was a costly mistake, both professionally and politically." Sarah considered this information carefully. Part of her felt vindicated, but another part felt protective of the new life she'd built at Cedar Falls Memorial. "Are they considering offering me a position?" Dr. Harrison hesitated. "I think they're testing the waters to see if you'd be interested. But Sarah, I have to ask, would you want to go back after what they put you through?" It was a question Sarah hadn't fully considered. 6 months ago, she would have jumped at the chance to return to Riverside General and reclaim her former life. But now, having built something meaningful from nothing, the prospect felt more complicated. "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly. "A year ago, I thought my identity was completely tied to that place. Now, I'm not sure I'd want to go backward." The conversation with Dr. Harrison lingered in Sarah's mind for days. She found herself examining her feelings about Riverside General and what it would mean to return to the place that had abandoned her during her darkest hour. At Cedar Falls Memorial, Sarah continued to thrive in her new role. The pediatric emergency. The program was exceeding all expectations, and she was being consulted by other departments about applying similar patient-centered approaches to adult care. Her colleagues looked to her for leadership on complex cases, and she had earned genuine respect throughout the hospital. One evening, as Sarah was finishing documentation after a particularly challenging shift, Janet Mills stopped by her desk. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that we've received several inquiries from other hospitals asking about recruiting you," Janet said. "Apparently, your reputation in pediatric emergency medicine is spreading quickly." Sarah looked up with surprise. "Other hospitals are asking about me?" 3 different facilities have called in the past 2 weeks. They're interested in hiring you to develop similar programs at their hospitals. Janet sat down across from Sarah. "I'm telling you this because I want you to know how valuable you've become to our organization. We don't want to lose you." The idea that multiple hospitals were interested in her expertise was both flattering and overwhelming. Sarah had gone from being unemployable to being actively recruited in less than a year. "I'm not looking to leave," Sarah assured Janet. "I'm happy here, and I believe in what we're building." "Good, because the board has authorized me to offer you another promotion. We want to create a new position, Director of Pediatric Services. It would involve overseeing all pediatric care throughout the hospital, not just emergency services." The offer was unexpected and significant. It would represent a major advancement in Sarah's career beyond anything she'd achieved at Riverside General. It would also mean taking on substantial administrative responsibilities and helping shape the hospital's entire approach to pediatric care. "That's an incredible opportunity," Sarah said, her mind racing with the possibilities. "Take some time to think about it," Janet suggested, "but know that the board sees you as a key leader in our future growth and development." That weekend, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 18 months ago, she'd been a competent but relatively junior nurse at Riverside General, content with her role but not particularly ambitious for advancement. The trauma of losing her job and her marriage had forced her to dig deeper into her capabilities and discover strengths she didn't know she possessed. She thought about Tom, now serving his prison sentence and occasionally sending letters of apology that she rarely read. His betrayal had devastated her at the time, but it had also freed her from a relationship that had been limiting her growth without her realizing it. The small apartment that had initially felt like a step backward now felt like a launching pad for bigger possibilities. She'd learned to value her independence and to make decisions based on her own goals rather than someone else's expectations or needs. Most importantly, Sarah had rediscovered her passion for nursing and her capacity for leadership. The pediatric emergency program had reignited her sense of purpose and shown her that she could create meaningful change in healthcare delivery. On Monday morning, Sarah accepted the promotion to Director of Pediatric Services. The new role would begin in 6 weeks, giving her time to transition her current responsibilities and prepare for the expanded scope of leadership. The announcement of Sarah's promotion was met with enthusiasm throughout Cedar Falls Memorial. Her colleagues in the emergency department threw an impromptu celebration, and several doctors expressed their excitement about working with her in her new capacity. Dr. Foster pulled Sarah aside during the celebration. "You've come so far from that first night when you helped Dorothy Chen," she said. "I knew you had exceptional skills, but watching you develop into a leader has been remarkable." "I couldn't have done it without your support," Sarah replied. "You took a chance on me when no one else would." "I took a chance on your abilities," Dr. Foster corrected. "Everything you've accomplished since then has been because of your own talent and determination." As the celebration continued around them, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected turns her life had taken. The pain of losing her job at Riverside General had led her to discover capabilities she never would have developed otherwise. 2 weeks later, Sarah received a formal letter from James Parker at Riverside General. The hospital was inviting her to interview for the position of Pediatric Emergency Medicine Coordinator, a newly created role that would involve developing a comprehensive pediatric emergency program. The letter acknowledged that Riverside General had made an error in accepting her resignation and expressed hope that she might consider returning to help lead an important new initiative. The salary offer was substantial, significantly more than her new position at Cedar Falls Memorial would pay. Sarah read the letter twice, marveling at how dramatically the situation had changed. The hospital that had forced her out was now courting her return, offering her a position that was essentially identical to what she'd created at Cedar Falls Memorial. She set the letter aside and continued preparing for her new role as Director of Pediatric Services. The irony of Riverside General's offer wasn't lost on her, but it no longer carried the emotional weight it might have 6 months earlier. That evening, Sarah called Dr. Harrison to discuss the unexpected invitation. "I told you they were reconsidering their decision," Dr. Harrison said. "This is their way of admitting they made a mistake." "It's surreal," Sarah admitted. "Part of me wants to show them what they gave up, but another part of me has moved beyond needing their validation." "What does your gut tell you to do?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "My gut tells me that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I've built something meaningful at Cedar Falls Memorial, and I'm not interested in starting over again, even if it means going back to my old life." The conversation helped Sarah clarify her feelings about the offer. She drafted a polite but firm decline, thanking Riverside General for their interest, but explaining that she was committed to her current role and the pediatric program she'd developed. Sending the letter felt like closing a chapter on the most difficult period of her life. Sarah was no longer defined by what had been taken from her. She was defined by what she'd built from the ashes of that loss. The following week, local media ran a feature story about Cedar Falls Memorial's innovative pediatric emergency program. Sarah was interviewed and photographed, described as a visionary nurse leader who had transformed pediatric care at the community hospital. The article mentioned her previous experience at Riverside General, but focused primarily on her current achievements and the impact of her program on local families. Several parents were quoted praising the quality of care their children had received and specifically mentioning Sarah's expertise and compassion. Reading the positive coverage, Sarah realized that her professional identity had been completely rebuilt. She was no longer the nurse who'd lost her job in a scandal. She was the nurse who'd pioneered an innovative approach to pediatric emergency care. The article was shared widely on social media, and Sarah received congratulatory messages from colleagues throughout the region. Several nursing schools reached out asking if she'd consider serving as a guest lecturer, and 2 professional organizations invited her to join their leadership committees. Most meaningfully, she received a handwritten note from Dorothy Chen, now recovered from her wrist fracture and still living at Sunny Meadows. Dorothy had seen the newspaper article and wanted Sarah to know how proud she was of her success. "I knew from the moment I met you that you were destined for great things," Dorothy wrote. "Your kindness and skill were too remarkable to stay hidden. Thank you for showing all of us that setbacks can become comebacks when we refuse to give up on ourselves." 3 months into her role as Director of Pediatric Services, Sarah received an unexpected phone call that would change everything. The caller was Dr. Margaret Steinberg, Chief of Pediatrics at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, one of the most prestigious pediatric medical centers in the country. "Ms. Mitchell, I've been following your work at Cedar Falls Memorial with a great interest," Dr. Steinberg said. "Your innovative approach to pediatric emergency care in a community hospital setting has caught the attention of several major medical centers. I'd like to discuss a rather unique opportunity with you." Sarah was intrigued but cautious. "What kind of opportunity?" "We're launching a national initiative to help community hospitals develop world-class pediatric emergency capabilities. We need someone with proven experience implementing these programs to lead the project. Your work at Cedar Falls Memorial makes you the ideal candidate." The position would involve traveling to hospitals across the country, consulting on pediatric emergency program development, and creating standardized protocols that could be adapted by facilities of various sizes. It was exactly the kind of role Sarah had never imagined possible for herself, even in her most ambitious moments at Riverside General. The position comes with a substantial salary increase, full benefits, and the opportunity to impact pediatric emergency care on a national scale, Dr. Steinberg continued. "We'd also want you to co-author research papers and present at major medical conferences." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the offer. "Dr. Steinberg, I'm honored that you'd consider me for such a position, but I have to ask, are you aware of my background? The circumstances that led me to Cedar Falls Memorial?" There was a pause before Dr. Steinberg responded. "Ms. Mitchell, I've done extensive research on your professional history. I know about your husband's legal troubles and the unfortunate way Riverside General handled the situation. What I care about are your clinical skills, your innovation in program development, and your proven ability to create meaningful change in pediatric care." The conversation continued for another hour, with Dr. Steinberg outlining the scope of the national program and the impact it could have on children's healthcare across the country. Sarah was genuinely tempted by the opportunity. but she also felt a deep loyalty to Cedar Falls Memorial and the community that had given her a second chance. "I need some time to consider this," Sarah said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need. This opportunity isn't going anywhere, and we're committed to finding the right person to lead this initiative." And after hanging up, Sarah sat in her office staring out at the parking lot where she'd first arrived as a desperate woman looking for any opportunity to return to nursing. The transformation in her life seemed almost impossible to believe. That evening, Sarah drove to Sunny Meadows to visit Dorothy Chen. The elderly woman had become like a grandmother to her, offering wisdom and perspective during the most challenging times of her recovery. "You look troubled, dear," Dorothy observed as they sat in the facility's garden. "Something big is happening, isn't it?" Sarah described the job offer from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, explaining the national scope of the position and the recognition it represented. Dorothy listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about Sarah's feelings and concerns. "It sounds like an incredible opportunity," she said finally, "but I sense you're conflicted about it." "I am," Sarah admitted. 2 years ago, I would have jumped at a chance like this without hesitation, but now I feel responsible to the people here who believed in me when no one else would." "Sarah, honey, loyalty is a beautiful quality, but it shouldn't become a prison," Dorothy said gently. "The people at Cedar Falls Memorial didn't give you this opportunity out of charity. They invested in you because they recognized your talent and dedication. Your success reflects well on their judgment." Addition. They talked for another hour, with Dorothy sharing stories from her 40 years as a teacher about difficult career decisions and the importance of following one's calling, even when it meant leaving comfortable situations. "The greatest gift you can give to the people who helped you," Dorothy concluded, "is to use the foundation they provided to build something even more meaningful. If this national position is truly your calling, then pursuing it honors everything Cedar Falls Memorial invested in you." The next morning, Sarah requested a meeting with Janet Mills to discuss the job offer. She felt she owed the nursing director complete honesty about the opportunity and her conflicted feelings about it. Janet's reaction surprised Sarah. Instead of expressing disappointment or trying to convince her to stay, Janet smiled broadly. "Sarah, this is exactly the kind of recognition you deserve," Janet said. "When we hired you, we knew we were getting someone special. The fact that a prestigious institution like Children's Hospital of Philadelphia wants you to lead a national program proves we were right." "But what about the pediatric program here? I feel like I'm abandoning something we built together." "You're not abandoning anything," Janet replied firmly. "You've created a solid foundation and trained excellent staff. The program will continue to thrive because you built it properly from the beginning. More importantly, if you take this national position, you'll be helping dozens of other communities develop similar programs." Janet leaned forward in her chair. "Sarah, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. We've received inquiries from 6 other hospitals trying to recruit you in the past month alone. Your reputation has grown far beyond what we can offer you here. It would be selfish of us to try to hold you back from an opportunity of this magnitude." The conversation helped Sarah realize that her colleagues at Cedar Falls Memorial genuinely wanted what was best for her career, even if it meant losing her leadership and expertise. That afternoon, Sarah called Dr. Steinberg to accept the position. The conversation was exhilarating as they discussed start dates, initial assignments, and the potential impact of the national program on pediatric emergency care. The announcement of Sarah's new position created a buzz throughout Cedar Falls Memorial. Her colleagues were uniformly supportive, expressing pride that someone from their hospital had been selected for such a prestigious role. Dr. Foster organized a farewell celebration that drew healthcare professionals from throughout the region. Several speakers talked about Sarah's impact on pediatric emergency care and her role in elevating the reputation of community hospitals. Sarah Mitchell proved that innovation and excellence aren't limited to large academic medical centers. Dr. Foster said during her remarks, "She showed us that a single dedicated professional can transform an entire field of medicine." The most moving moment of the evening came when a group of parents whose children had been treated in Sarah's pediatric emergency program presented her with a photo album documenting the stories of young patients whose lives had been improved by her innovations. "You didn't just create a program," one father said. "You created hope for parents who were scared and children who were suffering. Every family in this community is better off because of what you built here." As Sarah looked through the album, seeing photos of children she'd cared for and reading letters from grateful families, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment about the work she'd accomplished at Cedar Falls Memorial. 2 weeks before her departure, Sarah received another unexpected phone call. This time, it was Dr. Rebecca Harrison from Riverside General, but she wasn't calling about job opportunities. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that I probably should have mentioned months ago," Dr. Harrison said. "After you left Riverside, several of us filed formal complaints with the hospital board about how your termination was handled." Sarah was stunned. "You filed complaints?" "We argued that forcing you to resign because of your husband's crimes was discriminatory and legally questionable. We presented evidence of your excellent work record and patient satisfaction scores. We made it clear that losing you was a significant mistake." Dr. Harrison continued, "Those complaints, combined with the recognition you've received for your work at Cedar Falls Memorial, led to some major policy changes at Riverside. James Parker was quietly asked to step down as administrator, and the board implemented new protections for employees who might be affected by family members' legal troubles." The news that her former colleagues had advocated for her, even after she'd left the hospital, was deeply moving. It also explained some of the policy changes she'd heard about through professional networks. "There's something else," Dr. Harrison added. "The board has asked me to extend a formal apology for how you were treated. They recognize that they made a serious error in judgment, and they want to make amends." "What kind of amends?" Sarah asked. "They're prepared to offer you a substantial settlement and a formal letter of apology that could be made public if you choose. They're also willing to provide positive references for any future positions and to acknowledge publicly that your termination was unjustified." Sarah considered the offer carefully. A year ago, receiving an apology and settlement from Riverside General would have felt like vindication. Now it felt more like closure on a chapter of her life that she'd already moved beyond. "I appreciate the gesture," Sarah said finally, "but I don't need their apology or their money. I've built something much more valuable than what they took from me." "Are you sure?" "The settlement offer is quite substantial, I'm sure. But I do appreciate that you and others stood up for me. That means more than any financial compensation." Sarah's final week at Cedar Falls Memorial was bittersweet. She spent time with each department, ensuring smooth transitions and sharing her vision for continued growth of the pediatric services program. On her last day, Sarah made a final visit to Sunny Meadows to say goodbye to Dorothy Chen. The elderly woman was in her room, having declined physically since Sarah's last visit, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit undimmed. "I'm so proud of what you've accomplished," Dorothy said, holding Sarah's hand with surprising strength. "You've shown everyone what resilience and determination can achieve." "I couldn't have done it without your wisdom and encouragement," Sarah replied. "You helped me believe in myself when I'd lost all confidence." Dorothy smiled. "All I did was remind you of what was already there. The strength and skill were always yours, dear. You just needed to rediscover them. They talked for an hour about Sarah's new position and the opportunities it would provide to help children and families across the country. Dorothy was particularly interested in hearing about the research components of the role and the potential for publishing studies that could influence national standards of care. As Sarah prepared to leave, Dorothy gave her a small wrapped package. "Open it when you start your new job," she said. "It's something to remind you of where you came from and how far you've traveled." Sarah's first assignment with Children's Hospital of Philadelphia took her to a community hospital in rural Montana that was struggling to provide adequate emergency care for the children in their region. The facility served a vast geographic area with limited resources and no pediatric specialists. Walking into the hospital for her initial assessment, Sarah was reminded of her own journey from desperation to success. The staff was dedicated but overwhelmed, working with outdated equipment and minimal training in pediatric emergency medicine. Over the course of 2 weeks, Sarah worked with the hospital's team to develop a comprehensive pediatric emergency program adapted to their unique challenges and resources. She provided hands-on training, helped them secure funding for essential equipment, and established telemedicine connections with pediatric specialists at major medical centers. The transformation was remarkable. By the end of her consultation, the hospital had implemented protocols that dramatically improved their pediatric emergency capabilities. More importantly, the staff felt confident and competent to handle complex pediatric cases that previously would have required lengthy transfers to distant hospitals. The success of the Montana project led to similar assignments across the country. Sarah found herself working with hospitals in urban and rural settings, each presenting unique challenges and opportunities for innovation. 6 months into her new role, Sarah had consulted with 12 hospitals, co-authored 3 research papers, and presented her findings at 2 major medical conferences. The national program was being recognized as a groundbreaking initiative that was transforming pediatric emergency care in underserved communities. During a conference in Chicago, Sarah unexpectedly encountered James Parker, her former administrator from Riverside General. He approached her during a break between presentations, looking uncomfortable but determined to speak with her. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "What we did to you was wrong, and I've regretted it every day since you left." Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine remorse in his expression. "Mr. Parker, I appreciate that, but it's not necessary. What happened led me to opportunities I never would have had otherwise." "That doesn't excuse our decision," he insisted. "We let fear and politics override good judgment. You were an excellent nurse who deserved our support, not our abandonment." The conversation was brief but meaningful. Sarah felt no anger or resentment toward her former administrator, only a sense of closure and perhaps even gratitude for the path his decision had ultimately created for her. That evening, Sarah opened Dorothy's gift in her hotel room. Inside, the small box was a delicate silver compass with an inscription on the back, "For Sarah who found her true direction when she lost her way. With love and admiration, Dorothy." The compass became Sarah's constant companion as she traveled from hospital to hospital, a reminder of the journey that had brought her to this moment and the wisdom of the elderly woman who had helped her navigate the darkest period of her life. A year into her national role, Sarah received news that brought her story full circle. Cedar Falls Memorial had been selected to receive a prestigious national award for excellence in pediatric emergency care, based largely on the program Sarah had developed. Even more significantly, the hospital had been chosen to host the annual National Conference on Pediatric Emergency Medicine, bringing together healthcare professionals from across the country to learn about innovative approaches to pediatric care. Sarah was invited to deliver the keynote address at the conference, speaking to an audience of over 800 healthcare professionals about her journey from career devastation to national recognition. Standing at the podium in the same community where she had once felt hopeless and defeated, Sarah reflected on the incredible transformation her life had undergone. She thought about Tom, still serving his prison sentence, and felt only pity for the opportunities he had destroyed through his addiction and deception. She thought about her colleagues at Riverside General who had stood by her and her gratitude for their loyalty and advocacy. She thought about the team at Cedar Falls Memorial who had given her a second chance and supported her growth into a leader. Most of all, she thought about Dorothy Chen, now confined to a wheelchair but still mentally sharp, sitting in the front row of the auditorium with tears of pride in her eyes. 3 years ago, I thought my career was over. Sarah began her keynote address. I had lost my job, my marriage, and my sense of professional identity. I felt like a failure and couldn't imagine how I would rebuild my life. She paused, looking out at the audience of nurses, doctors, and administrators who hung on her every word. What I discovered during those dark months is that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are and what you're truly capable of achieving. The experience that felt like the end of my story was actually the beginning of a much more meaningful chapter. Sarah went on to describe her journey from disgrace to recognition, emphasizing the importance of resilience, the value of second chances, and the power of innovation to transform healthcare delivery. Every patient we treat, every family we comfort, every program we develop has the potential to create ripple effects that extend far beyond what we can imagine, she concluded. My story isn't unique because of what I lost, but because of what I chose to build from that loss. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes, and dozens of healthcare professionals approached Sarah afterward to share their own stories of professional challenges and transformation. Later that evening, at the conference reception, Sarah stood with Dr. Foster, Janet Mills, and Dorothy Chen, surrounded by colleagues from across the country who had come to celebrate the success of the pediatric emergency medicine program that had begun as a desperate attempt to rebuild a shattered career. You know what the most remarkable thing about all of this is? Dorothy said, her voice still strong despite her physical frailty. You didn't just save your own career, Sarah. You've probably saved hundreds of children's lives through the programs you've helped create across the country. As Sarah looked around the room, seeing healthcare professionals discussing innovations and sharing ideas that would improve pediatric care in their own communities, she realized that Dorothy was right. Her personal journey from devastation to triumph had created something much larger than professional redemption. The trauma of losing her job at Riverside General had forced her to dig deeper into her capabilities and discover strengths she never knew she possessed. The experience of building a program from scratch at Cedar Falls Memorial had given her the confidence and expertise to lead national initiatives. Most importantly, the support and encouragement of people like Dorothy Chen, Dr. Foster, and Janet Mills had taught her that true success isn't measured by titles or salaries, but by the positive impact you have on others and the legacy you create through your work. Standing in that reception hall, surrounded by the professional community that now recognized her as a leader and innovator, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy her career had ultimately become the catalyst for achievements she never could have imagined. The young nurse who had lost her job because of her husband's gambling debts had become a national expert whose work was transforming pediatric emergency care across the country. The woman who had once felt hopeless and abandoned had found her true calling and created a legacy that would benefit countless children and families for years to come. As the evening wound down, Sarah made her way back to her hotel room, fingering Dorothy's compass in her pocket and thinking about the unexpected paths that had led her to this place of professional fulfillment and personal peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight she was content to reflect on how far she had traveled from that devastating day when her world had fallen apart. The scandal that had once seemed like the end of her story had become the beginning of something far more meaningful and impactful than anything she had previously achieved. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, losing everything is exactly what you need to discover what you're really capable of becoming. 5 years after that devastating phone call from Detective Hayes had shattered her world, Sarah Mitchell stood in the boardroom of the American Hospital Association in Washington, D.C., preparing to present her groundbreaking research on pediatric emergency care protocols to the nation's most influential healthcare leaders. The irony of her transformation wasn't lost on her as she adjusted her presentation slides, each one representing years of innovation that had emerged from the ashes of her former life. The research she was about to present had revolutionized how community hospitals across America approached pediatric emergencies. Her work had been implemented in over 200 hospitals nationwide, directly impacting the care of thousands of children and establishing new standards that major medical centers were now adopting. The woman who had once been forced to resign, in disgrace, was now setting policy that would influence pediatric emergency medicine for decades to come. As healthcare executives filed into the boardroom, Sarah recognized several faces from medical conferences and professional journals. These were the people who shaped American healthcare policy, who controlled billions in medical funding, and who determined the direction of medical research and innovation. They were here to listen to her, to learn from her expertise, and to consider adopting her protocols as national standards. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the newly appointed Surgeon General, took a seat in the front row and smiled warmly at Sarah. They had worked together on several pediatric health initiatives, and Dr. Warren had become both a mentor and advocate for Sarah's work. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Warren addressed the room. Today we have the privilege of hearing from someone whose work has fundamentally changed how we think about pediatric emergency care in community settings. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's research has not only saved lives, but has also proven that innovation and excellence can emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. The title of Sarah's presentation flashed on the screen: From Crisis to Innovation, How Community-Based Pediatric Emergency Programs Can Achieve Outcomes Superior to Traditional Academic Medical Centers. It was a bold claim, backed by 5 years of rigorous data collection and analysis. Sarah began her presentation by sharing statistics that had shocked the medical community. Hospitals that had implemented her protocols were achieving patient satisfaction scores 20% higher than major children's hospitals. More significantly, clinical outcomes for pediatric emergencies in these community hospitals were now meeting or exceeding national benchmarks previously only achieved by specialized pediatric centers. The traditional model assumes that the best pediatric emergency care can only be delivered in large, specialized facilities, Sarah explained to the captivated audience. Our research demonstrates that community hospitals, when properly equipped and trained, can provide superior care because of their ability to deliver personalized, family-centered treatment in environments that are less intimidating and more accessible to patients. As she presented case studies from hospitals across the country, Sarah could see heads nodding throughout the room. The data was compelling, but more importantly, the human stories behind the statistics were transforming how these healthcare leaders thought about pediatric emergency medicine. She shared the story of a rural hospital in Wyoming that had implemented her protocols and successfully treated a complex pediatric trauma case that would have previously required a 3-hour helicopter transport to the nearest children's hospital. The child not only survived, but recovered completely, avoiding the risks and trauma associated with long-distance medical transport. Another case study highlighted an urban community hospital in Detroit that had reduced pediatric emergency wait times by 60%, while simultaneously improving patient satisfaction and clinical outcomes. The hospital had become the preferred destination for pediatric emergencies in their region, despite being located just 20 miles from a major children's hospital. The key insight, Sarah continued, is that pediatric emergency care isn't just about having the most advanced technology or the largest staff. It's about creating an environment where children feel safe, where families feel supported, and where every member of the healthcare team is specifically trained to understand and respond to the unique needs of young patients. The presentation included a detailed analysis of cost-effectiveness, showing that community hospitals implementing her protocols were providing superior care at significantly lower costs than traditional pediatric emergency departments. This finding had captured the attention of hospital administrators and insurance companies nationwide, as it suggested a pathway to better outcomes while controlling healthcare expenses. As Sarah moved through her slides, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The skills she was presenting hadn't emerged from traditional academic research or clinical rotations. They had been forged in the crucible of personal and professional devastation, refined through months of rebuilding her career from the ground up, and validated through years of hands-on implementation in real-world healthcare settings. The audience was particularly engaged when Sarah presented her findings on staff satisfaction and retention. Hospitals implementing her protocols were experiencing significantly lower nursing turnover rates and higher job satisfaction scores among their pediatric staff. The comprehensive training programs and supportive work environments she had developed were creating more fulfilling career paths for healthcare workers while simultaneously improving patient care. One of the most unexpected discoveries in our research, Sarah noted, was that hospitals implementing these protocols began attracting higher caliber nursing and medical staff. Healthcare professionals wanted to work in environments where they could provide exceptional patient care without the bureaucratic obstacles often found in larger institutions. She presented a compelling case study from a hospital in rural Montana, the same facility where she had conducted her first consultation 5 years earlier. The hospital had not only transformed its pediatric emergency capabilities, but had become a regional training center, attracting healthcare professionals from across the Mountain West who wanted to learn innovative approaches to community-based pediatric care. The transformation of that Montana hospital illustrated a broader pattern Sarah had observed. Hospitals implementing her protocols often became centers of innovation and excellence that elevated the entire healthcare ecosystem. In their regions, they formed partnerships with larger medical centers, developed telemedicine networks, and created educational programs that benefited multiple communities. As Sarah neared the conclusion of her presentation, she addressed the question that many in the audience were undoubtedly considering. How could these innovations be scaled nationally without losing their effectiveness or personal touch? The beauty of this model, Sarah explained, is that it's specifically designed to be adaptable to local communities and resources. Rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all solution, we provide frameworks that can be customized to meet the unique needs of each hospital and the population it serves. She outlined her team's current work, developing a national certification program for community-based pediatric emergency care, which would provide standardized training and quality metrics while preserving the flexibility that made these programs so effective. The certification program had already received preliminary approval from several major medical accreditation organizations. The financial implications of widespread adoption were staggering. Sarah's analysis suggested that implementing these protocols in just half of America's community hospitals could save the healthcare system over $2 billion annually, while improving outcomes for millions of children. But the real measure of success, Sarah concluded, isn't found in cost savings or efficiency metrics. It's found in the faces of children who receive care in environments designed specifically for their needs, and in the peace of mind of parents who know their children are receiving the best possible treatment close to home. The presentation ended with a powerful video compilation featuring testimonials from families whose children had been treated in hospitals implementing Sarah's protocols. Parents spoke emotionally about feeling heard and supported during their children's medical crises, while young patients described feeling less scared and more comfortable during their hospital experiences. The applause that followed was sustained and enthusiastic, but what moved Sarah most were the questions that came afterward. Healthcare leaders weren't asking whether these innovations were valuable. They were asking how quickly they could begin implementing them in their own organizations. Dr. Warren approached Sarah after the formal session ended. "That presentation was remarkable," she said. "I think you've just changed the trajectory of pediatric emergency medicine in this country." Throughout the remainder of the day, Sarah found herself in continuous conversations with hospital executives, policymakers, and medical researchers who wanted to learn more about her work. Several major healthcare systems expressed interest in pilot programs, while others inquired about partnership opportunities for research and development. The most meaningful conversation came with Dr. Robert Chen, Dorothy's nephew, who had flown in from California specifically to attend Sarah's presentation. Dorothy had passed away 6 months earlier, but not before seeing Sarah receive the National Excellence in Nursing Award, the profession's highest honor. "Aunt Dorothy talked about you constantly in her final months," Dr. Chen told Sarah. "She said you were proof that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow from the darkest soil. She would have been so proud to see you here today." Sarah felt tears threatening as she thought about the elderly woman whose wisdom and encouragement had sustained her through the darkest period of her life. Dorothy's compass still resided in Sarah's briefcase, a constant reminder of the journey, from desperation to achievement that had defined the past 5 years. That evening, Sarah attended a reception hosted by the American Hospital Association, where she was surrounded by healthcare leaders eager to discuss collaboration opportunities. The conversations ranged from research partnerships to consulting, agreements to speaking engagements at major medical conferences. Dr. Margaret Steinberg from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, who had first recruited Sarah to the national stage, approached her with an unexpected proposal. "Sarah, we're launching a new institute focused on community-based pediatric care innovation. We want you to serve as the founding director." The position would involve leading a team of researchers, overseeing a multi-million-dollar budget, and establishing the institute as the premier center for community pediatric care research. It was an opportunity that would cement Sarah's position as the leading authority in her field, while providing resources to expand her work exponentially. The institute would be based in Philadelphia, but you'd have complete autonomy to structure the research agenda and choose your team, Dr. Steinberg continued. "We're prepared to offer you whatever resources you need to take this work to the next level." As Sarah considered the offer, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since those desperate months after Tom's arrest. The woman who had once cleaned bedpans at a nursing home for minimum wage was now being offered the opportunity to direct a major medical research institute with national influence. The irony of her transformation extended beyond professional achievement. Her personal life had also been rebuilt on a foundation of authenticity and purpose that she'd never experienced during her marriage to Tom. She had learned to value her own company, to make decisions based on her own values, and to build relationships founded on mutual respect and shared interests rather than convenience or habit. 6 months earlier, Sarah had begun dating Dr. Michael Harrison, a pediatric emergency physician she'd met during one of her hospital consultations. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on professional respect and personal compatibility, rather than the desperate need for security that had characterized her marriage to Tom. Michael understood the demands of her career and shared her passion for improving pediatric healthcare. More importantly, he appreciated the strength and resilience she had developed through her struggles, seeing those qualities as assets rather than evidence of damaged goods. The following morning, Sarah flew back to Philadelphia, her mind racing with possibilities and plans. The Institute opportunity represented a chance to institutionalize and expand her work in ways that could impact pediatric emergency care globally. She would have the resources to conduct large-scale research studies, develop advanced training programs, and establish international partnerships. But she also thought about the community hospitals where her work had begun, the dedicated healthcare workers who had implemented her protocols, and the thousands of children whose lives had been improved by innovations born from her personal crisis. Whatever direction her career took next, she was committed to maintaining those grassroots connections that had made her work so effective. 2 weeks later, Sarah accepted the position as founding director of the Institute for Community-Based Pediatric Care. The announcement made headlines in medical journals and healthcare publications, with many articles noting the remarkable trajectory of her career from nursing home aide to national healthcare leader. The response from hospitals already implementing her protocols was overwhelmingly positive. Healthcare workers who had trained under her guidance expressed excitement about having institutional support for continued innovation and research. Several community hospitals announced plans to establish fellowship programs in partnership with the new institute. Perhaps most significantly, medical schools began incorporating Sarah's community-based care models into their curricula. A new generation of healthcare professionals would be trained from the beginning to think creatively about delivering excellent care in resource-limited environments. On the day Sarah officially began her role as Institute Director, she found a package on her desk with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Cedar Falls Daily Herald with a handwritten note attached. The clipping was a recent article about Riverside General Hospital's financial struggles and declining patient satisfaction scores. The hospital had lost several major contracts and was facing possible merger with a larger healthcare system. The note, written in Tom's familiar handwriting, simply said, "I heard about your success. I'm proud of what you've accomplished and sorry for everything I destroyed. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." Sarah read the note twice, then placed it in her desk drawer without anger or bitterness. Tom's acknowledgement of his mistakes felt like the final closure on a chapter of her life that had been definitively closed years earlier. She felt no satisfaction in hearing about Riverside General's struggles, only a sense of gratitude that their short-sighted decision had ultimately led her to opportunities far beyond anything she could have achieved there. That afternoon, Sarah held her first staff meeting as Institute Director, addressing a team of researchers, clinicians, and administrators who would help expand her work nationally and internationally. Looking around the conference room at the accomplished professionals who had chosen to join her mission, she felt a profound sense of responsibility and possibility. 5 years ago, she began, I thought my career was over. I had lost my job, my marriage, and my sense of professional identity. What I discovered during that difficult time is that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what you're truly capable of achieving. She went on to outline her vision for the Institute, emphasizing the importance of remaining connected to the community hospitals and frontline healthcare workers whose daily challenges drove innovation and improvement. Our success won't be measured by the number of research papers we publish or the grants we receive, Sarah concluded. It will be measured by the number of children who receive better care because of the work we do here, and by the number of healthcare professionals who find greater satisfaction and meaning in their careers, because we've given them better tools and support. As the meeting ended and her new colleagues dispersed to begin their work, Sarah stood alone in the conference room, looking out at the Philadelphia skyline and thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The devastation of Tom's gambling addiction and the injustice of her termination from Riverside General had seemed like the end of her story. Instead, they had been the beginning of a transformation that she never could have imagined. The skills she had developed while rebuilding her career, the resilience she had discovered in her darkest moments, and the clarity of purpose she had found in serving others had culminated in opportunities that exceeded her most ambitious dreams. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. Saw the news about the Institute launch. Incredibly proud of everything you've accomplished. Can't wait to celebrate with you tonight. Sarah smiled, grateful for the love and support of someone who understood both her professional passion and her personal journey. The life she was building now was authentic and fulfilling in ways her previous existence had never been. That evening, as Sarah walked through the streets of Philadelphia toward the restaurant where she would meet Michael for dinner, she thought about all the people who had played crucial roles in her transformation. Dorothy Chen, whose wisdom had sustained her through the darkest months. Dr. Foster, who had taken a chance on a disgraced nurse. Janet Mills, who had recognized her potential for leadership. Dr. Harrison, who had advocated for her when she couldn't advocate for herself. Most importantly, she thought about all the children and families whose lives had been touched by the innovations that had emerged from her personal crisis. The programs she had developed would continue benefiting communities long after her career ended, creating a legacy that transformed personal devastation into lasting positive impact. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy her reputation had become the foundation for achievements that would influence pediatric healthcare for generations. Sometimes, Sarah reflected as she entered the restaurant where Michael was waiting. With a congratulatory smile, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you ever accomplish. 10 years had passed since Sarah Mitchell first walked into the offices of the Institute for Community-Based Pediatric Care as its founding director. And today she stood before the largest gathering of healthcare professionals in the organization's history. The annual International Conference on Pediatric Emergency Innovation had grown from a small regional meeting to a global event that attracted over 5,000 participants from 43 countries, all eager to learn about the revolutionary approaches to pediatric care that had emerged from her institute. The conference was being held at the Pennsylvania Convention Center, with Sarah delivering the opening keynote address to an audience that included health ministers from developing nations, CEOs of major hospital systems, prominent medical researchers, and frontline healthcare workers from every continent. The theme of this year's conference was From Local Innovation to Global Impact, a reflection of how Sarah's community-based approach had been adapted and implemented in healthcare systems worldwide. As Sarah stepped onto the stage, she carried with her a small wooden box that had become her trademark at major speaking engagements. Inside was Dorothy Chen's compass, now worn smooth from years of handling, alongside a collection of letters from children and families whose lives had been transformed by the programs her institute had developed. These tangible reminders of her journey and impact grounded her before every major presentation. The audience rose in sustained applause as Sarah approached the podium, their recognition reflecting not just her professional achievements, but the profound influence her work had exerted on global pediatric healthcare policy. Medical journals had dubbed her the mother of modern pediatric emergency medicine, while international health organizations credited her innovations with saving tens of thousands of lives in underserved communities worldwide. Sarah began her address by sharing a statistic that had stunned the global medical community. Mortality rates for pediatric emergencies in community hospitals implementing her protocols had decreased by 43% over the past decade, while patient satisfaction scores had increased by 67%. These weren't just numbers on research papers. They represented thousands of children who had survived critical medical situations because of innovations born from one woman's determination to rebuild her career after devastating personal loss. When I first developed the community-based pediatric emergency protocols 15 years ago, Sarah told the rapt audience, I was a desperate woman trying to prove that I still had value as a healthcare professional. I never imagined that work born from personal crisis would eventually influence how we deliver pediatric care on every inhabited continent. The scope of her institute's impact was truly staggering. Programs based on Sarah's innovations had been implemented in over 800 hospitals across the United States, reducing healthcare costs by billions of dollars while dramatically improving outcomes for children in rural and underserved communities. More remarkably, international adaptations of her protocols were now operating in countries ranging from rural Kenya to urban Brazil, proving that excellent pediatric emergency care could be delivered effectively regardless of resource constraints. Sarah's presentation included a live video connection to Dr. Maria Santos in São Paulo, Brazil, who had adapted the community-based protocols for use in that city's favelas. The Brazilian implementation had reduced pediatric mortality in those impoverished communities by 58%, while creating a training model that was being replicated throughout Latin America. Dr. Mitchell's approach taught us that excellent medical care isn't about having the most expensive equipment or the largest facilities, Dr. Santos explained to the global audience. It's about understanding the specific needs of the communities you serve and designing care delivery around those needs, rather than forcing communities to adapt to rigid institutional structures. The international success of Sarah's work had led to her appointment as a special advisor to the World Health Organization, where she was leading a global initiative to improve pediatric emergency care in developing nations. The WHO project had already established training centers on 4 continents, creating a network of healthcare professionals skilled in delivering high-quality pediatric emergency care in resource-limited environments. Perhaps most significantly, Sarah's innovations had fundamentally changed how medical schools taught emergency medicine. Her case-based learning methods and community-centered care philosophy were now standard curriculum components in over 200 medical schools worldwide. A generation of physicians and nurses was being trained from the beginning to think creatively about delivering excellent care, regardless of setting or resources. The audience was particularly moved when Sarah shared success stories from some of the most challenging healthcare environments on Earth. A hospital in rural Afghanistan had used her protocols to establish the first functioning pediatric emergency department in the region, dramatically reducing child mortality while providing hope to families who had previously watched children die from treatable conditions. Another powerful example came from a community hospital in rural Alaska, where Sarah's telemedicine integration protocols had enabled local healthcare workers to successfully treat complex pediatric cases that would have previously required dangerous medical evacuations across hundreds of miles of wilderness. The program had not only saved lives, but had also preserved families and communities by allowing children to receive excellent care close to home. The most profound lesson I've learned over the past 15 years, Sarah continued, is that innovation often emerges not from abundance, but from necessity. When we're forced to find creative solutions to seemingly impossible challenges, we often discover approaches that work better than traditional methods. Sarah's personal transformation paralleled the global impact of her professional work. Her marriage to Michael Harrison 3 years earlier had created a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep understanding of the demands and rewards of healthcare leadership. Michael had become a prominent pediatric emergency physician in his own right, often collaborating with Sarah's institute on research projects and program implementations. Their home in suburban Philadelphia had become an informal gathering place for healthcare innovators from around the world. Sarah and Michael regularly hosted dinners for visiting international colleagues, creating a network of relationships that facilitated the global spread of community-based care innovations. These personal connections had proven as important as formal partnerships in advancing pediatric healthcare worldwide. The couple had also established a private foundation focused on supporting healthcare workers in developing nations, providing scholarships for advanced training and funding for equipment and supplies needed to implement community-based pediatric care programs. The foundation had already supported over 300 healthcare professionals and equipped dozens of hospitals with essential pediatric emergency supplies. During her keynote address, Sarah announced the Institute's most ambitious project, yet a comprehensive global certification program for community-based pediatric emergency care that would establish uniform standards while preserving the flexibility that made these programs so effective. The certification would be available in multiple languages and adapted to different healthcare systems, creating a worldwide network of excellence in pediatric emergency medicine. This certification program represents the culmination of 15 years of research, implementation, and refinement, Sarah explained. It will ensure that children everywhere have access to emergency care that meets the highest standards of quality and compassion, regardless of where they live or what resources are available in their communities. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause as healthcare leaders recognized the potential for this certification to establish global standards while promoting local innovation and adaptation. Several countries had already committed to adopting the certification as a requirement for pediatric emergency care providers. Sarah's presentation concluded with a deeply personal reflection on the journey that had brought her to this moment of global influence and recognition. She spoke candidly about the devastation of losing her job due to her husband's gambling addiction, the months of despair when she thought her career was over, and the slow process of rebuilding her professional identity from scratch. The experience that felt like the end of my story became the beginning of something far more meaningful than anything I had previously accomplished, Sarah reflected. Personal crisis forced me to examine what I truly valued about healthcare and challenged me to find new ways of delivering care that honored both clinical excellence and human dignity. She shared how the lessons learned during her darkest period had informed every aspect of her subsequent work: the importance of resilience in the face of adversity, the value of community support during times of crisis, and the recognition that sometimes losing everything is necessary to discover your true potential. The protocols and programs we've developed aren't just clinical innovations, Sarah continued. They're expressions of values forged in personal struggle. The belief that everyone deserves excellent health care regardless of their circumstances. The conviction that creativity and compassion can overcome resource limitations, and the understanding that healing involves not just treating medical conditions, but supporting entire families and communities. The audience of 5,000 healthcare professionals was visibly moved as Sarah concluded her address by reading a letter from a mother in rural Guatemala whose daughter's life had been saved by a community hospital implementing Sarah's protocols. The letter, written in Spanish and translated for the conference, described how the family had felt heard, supported, and respected during their daughter's medical crisis, even though they lived in an impoverished village hours from the nearest major city. "Your programs didn't just save my daughter's life," the letter read. "They showed our entire community that we matter, that our children deserve the same quality of care as children anywhere else in the world. You gave us hope when we thought there was none." As Sarah finished reading the letter, the convention center erupted in the longest standing ovation in the conference's history. Healthcare professionals from every corner of the globe rose to their feet, recognizing not just Sarah's professional achievements, but the profound human impact of work that had transformed personal devastation into global healing. Following her keynote address, Sarah spent the remainder of the day in meetings with health ministers, hospital executives, and research collaborators who were eager to expand the reach of community-based pediatric care programs. The conversations ranged from technical discussions about protocol adaptations to strategic planning for global implementation initiatives. One of the most meaningful meetings was with Dr. James Ochieng from Kenya, who had successfully adapted Sarah's protocols for use in rural East African communities. His work had reduced pediatric mortality rates in his region by over 60%, while training a new generation of African healthcare workers in advanced pediatric emergency care techniques. "Dr. Mitchell, your work has given us the tools to prove that excellent medical care is possible anywhere," Dr. Ochieng said. "But more importantly, it has given our communities hope and our healthcare workers the confidence to tackle challenges they once thought were impossible." The global network that had emerged from Sarah's initial community-based programs now included over 2,000 healthcare facilities on 6 continents, creating an unprecedented collaboration in pediatric emergency medicine. Regular video conferences connected healthcare workers from rural Montana to urban Nigeria, sharing best practices and troubleshooting challenges in real time. That evening, Sarah attended the Conference Awards dinner, where she received the newly created Global Impact in Healthcare Award, recognizing individuals whose work had fundamentally changed medical practice worldwide. The award was presented by Dr. Margaret Chan, former Director General of the World Health Organization, who had worked closely with Sarah on international pediatric health initiatives. Dr. Mitchell's contribution to global health extends far beyond any single innovation or research study, Dr. Chan said in her presentation remarks. "She has fundamentally changed how we think about delivering healthcare in resource-limited environments, proving that excellence and compassion can flourish anywhere when we approach medical care with creativity, cultural sensitivity, and unwavering commitment to human dignity." The award citation noted that Sarah's work had influenced healthcare policy in 43 countries, trained over 50,000 healthcare professionals, and directly impacted the lives of more than 2 million children and their families. These numbers, impressive as they were, barely captured the full scope of her influence on global pediatric healthcare. As Sarah accepted the award, she thought about all the people who had played crucial roles in her transformation, from a disgraced nurse to a globally recognized healthcare leader. She dedicated the award to Dorothy Chen, whose wisdom had sustained her through the darkest period of her life, and to all the healthcare workers worldwide who had implemented her protocols with dedication and creativity. This award belongs not to me alone, but to every healthcare worker who has chosen to believe that excellent care is possible regardless of circumstances, Sarah said in her acceptance speech. It belongs to every community that has embraced innovative approaches to healthcare delivery, and to every family that has trusted us to care for their most precious children during their most vulnerable moments. The following morning, Sarah participated in a panel discussion with other global health leaders about the future of pediatric emergency medicine. The conversation focused on emerging challenges such as climate change-related health crises, increasing global migration, and the need for healthcare systems that could adapt rapidly to changing circumstances. Sarah's contributions to the discussion reflected the wisdom gained from 15 years of implementing healthcare innovations in diverse and challenging environments. She emphasized the importance of building resilient healthcare systems that could maintain quality care even during crises, and the need for training programs that prepared healthcare workers to think creatively and adapt quickly to unexpected challenges. The lessons we've learned from community-based pediatric emergency care apply far beyond pediatrics, Sarah observed. They're really lessons about human-centered healthcare design, about building systems that prioritize patient needs over institutional convenience, and about the remarkable things that become possible when we approach healthcare challenges with both clinical rigor and genuine compassion. The panel discussion concluded with commitments from several international health organizations to expand funding for community-based care initiatives and to incorporate Sarah's approaches into their global health programming. The World Bank announced a new $50 million initiative to support community-based pediatric emergency programs in developing nations, while the Gates Foundation committed to funding training programs based on Sarah's models. On her final day at the conference, Sarah participated in a workshop for young healthcare professionals who were interested in careers in global health innovation. The room was filled with medical students, nursing students, and early career physicians and nurses who saw Sarah's work as inspiration for their own future contributions to healthcare. The most important advice I can give you, Sarah told the eager young professionals, is to never underestimate the power of personal adversity to fuel professional innovation. Some of the most significant advances in healthcare have come from people who refused to accept that suffering was inevitable, who channeled their own experiences of crisis into determination to prevent others from facing similar challenges. She encouraged them to seek out challenging assignments, to work in underserved communities, and to always remember that their ultimate measure of success would be the positive impact they had on the lives of patients and families, rather than personal recognition or financial reward. The workshop concluded with a commitment ceremony where each participant pledged to spend at least 2 years of their career working in underserved communities, carrying forward the values and approaches that had made Sarah's work so transformative. As Sarah prepared to leave Philadelphia and return to her institute, she reflected on how completely her life had been transformed since that devastating phone call 15 years earlier. The woman who had once cleaned bedpans in a nursing home while struggling to rebuild her shattered reputation was now recognized as one of the most influential healthcare leaders of her generation. More importantly, the personal qualities that had emerged from her struggle with adversity had become the foundation for professional achievements that exceeded her wildest dreams. The resilience she had developed during her darkest months, the empathy she had gained from experiencing professional and personal devastation, and the clarity of purpose she had discovered while rebuilding her career had all contributed to innovations that were now benefiting children and families worldwide. Her marriage to Michael had created a partnership that enriched both their personal lives and their professional work. Together, they had built a relationship based on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep commitment to using their skills and resources to make a positive difference in the world. The institute Sarah had founded had grown into a globally recognized center of excellence that was training the next generation of healthcare innovators while continuously developing new approaches to pediatric emergency care. Her team of researchers and clinicians were now leading their own projects and initiatives, ensuring that the work would continue evolving and expanding long after Sarah's eventual retirement. As her plane lifted off from Philadelphia International Airport, Sarah looked down at the city where she had rebuilt her career and created a global movement in pediatric healthcare. The lights spreading out below represented millions of lives, including thousands of children who were safer and healthier because of innovations that had emerged from one woman's refusal to let personal devastation define her future. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy her reputation had become the catalyst for achievements that would influence pediatric healthcare for generations to come. Sometimes, Sarah reflected as the plane climbed into the evening sky, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing you ever accomplish. Her phone contained dozens of messages from colleagues around the world, sharing updates on program implementations, research breakthroughs, and successful patient outcomes that demonstrated the continued expansion and refinement of community-based pediatric care. Each message represented another life touched, another family supported, another community empowered to provide excellent health care for their children. The compass Dorothy Chen had given her 15 years earlier remained in her briefcase, a constant reminder of the journey from desperation to global influence. But now it was accompanied by hundreds of letters from children and families, photographs from hospital implementations worldwide, and research publications that documented the transformation of pediatric emergency care on every continent. Sarah Mitchell had become living proof that personal crisis, when met with determination and vision, could become the foundation for achievements that change the world. Her story would continue inspiring healthcare professionals for generations, demonstrating that sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to discover what you're truly capable of becoming. Up next, you've got two more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.